Now we've customized the preloader a little bit by changing the text in it, but that's kind of boring. So let's create a little bit more of a fancy preloader using some graphics. Now I've got a graphic that I created. We'll go to File, Import, Import to Stage, and it's called airspeed.png, and it's basically an image of an airspeed indicator. And actually, before we do that, let's go into this loading movie clip. So we'll double click on that to go into it. And let's create another layer above layer 185, and we'll just put AI here for airspeed indicator. And with that layer selected, we'll go to File, Import, Import to Stage, and airspeed.png is the file we want, so I'll click on Open, and here we go. Now this is just a very basic airspeed indicator with no needle on it. And you'll see that I've actually changed the numbers on it as well. Well, I don't know if you'll see that. I don't know if you know what numbers are supposed to be on an airspeed indicator. But instead of showing the airspeed here, I'm showing percent loaded. We have 0, 25%, 50%, 75, and 100. What we're going to do is we're going to create a needle that hovers over this and moves or rotates around as the file loads. Now we're going to use this same basic setup using this 100 frame animation. And in frame 1, the needle will be at 0. In frame 100, the needle will be at 100. So, let's take a look at how we would do that. First of all, we no longer need the text layers. There's a couple ways we can get rid of it. We could just delete them by selecting each one and hitting the trash can icon. But I'm going to hold on to them in case someday I decide I want to go back to the text animation. And one way we can get rid of them without actually deleting them is by turning both of these layers into a guide layer. And the way we do that is we simply right-click on it. And in order to turn a mask layer into a guide layer, we first need to uncheck mask here. So we're going to uncheck that, and then right-click on it, and click on guide. Same thing down here. Right-click on layer 184, and click on guide. Now we can still see everything on the stage, but if we just lock these two layers and make them both invisible, they're gone. Now, making them invisible is not what makes them invisible when we test our movie. When we test our movie, they're not going to be visible, but they're not going to be visible because we've turned them into guide layers, not because we've made them invisible here. Making them invisible here does not do anything to the visibility in the actual published product. And also we need to get rid of this light blue text field, so we'll lock that layer, make it invisible. Now again, just because we've done that doesn't mean it's going to be invisible in the final movie. We actually need to turn this into a guide layer. So we'll right click and click on guide. So that's just one way that you can temporarily get rid of layers without actually deleting them. Now if you've got CS3, there's other ways you can do that, but if you don't have CS3, you can just turn those into guide layers and it will work just fine. Okay, so for our airspeed indicator layer, let's take our airspeed indicator and nudge it into place right in the center of the screen somewhere. And the next thing we want to do is we want to create the needle. Now I'm just going to create this using Flash's graphic tools. I don't actually have an image to import for this one. So let's go ahead and lock that AI layer. And that gives you a good idea of what it's going to look like. And then we'll create a new layer above the AI layer. And we'll call it needle. And for the needle, I'm just going to first of all start by creating a circle. So we'll go to the oval tool, and this is just going to be a black circle. I'm going to make this too big for now, and then we'll make this smaller when we actually apply it to our graphic. And then I'm going to use the line tool here. Actually, no, let's do this using the rectangle tool. Got a better idea. So we'll make the needle however long we think we need it. And let's change that fill color to white. And I'm going to get rid of the stroke around it, so I'll double click on the stroke to select all four sides and just hit delete. So we just have the white foreground. Now I want to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to click on the corners here and bring them out to the right and to the left a little bit. And then I'm going to make the top of this point upwards. And we can do that. We can add another point to this particular line by holding on to Alt. Notice if we just, instead of holding on to Alt, notice if we just click and drag up, it makes a curve. Control Z. Instead, if we hold on to Alt and click and drag up, we just add another point there. So we'll just drag that straight up, and there we go. Then we can hit Control 1 to zoom back out to 100%. And we'll click on our circle and drag it over the bottom portion of our needle. So there's our needle. We'll take this, we'll move it over here, and then make it smaller by hitting Q to switch to the free transform tool. And then we'll just resize that. It might be easier to turn off snap to objects while we're resizing it. It also might be a lot easier if we zoom in a little bit. I accidentally skewed that. Let's grab it and move it down here. And again, let's zoom in a little more and resize it a little more. And then we can nudge that into place using the arrow keys. And there we go, that looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to click on the needle layer again to make sure it's all selected, and then hit F8 to convert it to a symbol. And we'll just call this needle. We're going to make it a movie clip symbol. And we're actually going to put the registration point. No, let's go ahead and leave it there. That'll work. We'll click on OK. And there we go. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. And when this needle rotates around, notice what happens if we try to rotate it now. That's not the way we want it to rotate. So let's hit Control Z to undo that. We want it to rotate from this black knob, from where it's supposed to be anchored, obviously. So actually, first of all, it looks like it needs to be nudged up a little bit. But if we want it to rotate from down here in the center of this black circle down here, what we need to do is, with the free transform tool selected, we're going to grab this circle that's in the very center of our object, and we're going to drag it down to the center of this circle down here. And this little circle basically acts as an anchor point for rotation. So now if we rotate this around, you'll see it's rotating just like we want it to. Okay, so we'll hit Control Z. Actually, we don't really need to undo it. We're just going to drag it up until the pointer is on 0, like so. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to jump out to frame 25, because at frame 25 we have this marker here. So at frame 25 on the AI layer, on the needle layer, we're going to hit F6 to add a new keyframe there. And in that new keyframe, we're going to rotate this down so that it's pointing at 25. If we do it this way, we'll stay pretty precise. If we try to do it here in frame 1 and then in frame 100, then it might not be as precise for these in-between numbers. So I like to be precise. So now this next one is 50. It's kind of blurred out and hard to see, but this is supposed to be 50% right here. So we'll jump out to frame 50, which is where we're going to be when we're at 50%. So for frame 50 on the needle layer, again, I'll hit F6 to add a new keyframe there and rotate this around a little bit more until it's on 50. And then we'll do it again for 75. F6 to add a new keyframe, rotate this around. And then finally for frame 100, F6 to add a new keyframe, and we'll rotate this up to 100%. Very good. So now we just need to right click in between each of these sets of keyframes and click on Create Motion Tween. Right click, Create Motion Tween, right click, Create Motion Tween, and then finally right click, Create Motion Tween. So now as we pan across, we see that it's actually rotating. And when it gets to frame 100, it stops at basically 100 knots, I guess. It stops at where this dial reads 100. So that's basically what we're going for. And the cool thing about this is we already have the preloader set up so that it's going to play through these frames. So we don't have to do anything else to the action script at all. It's going to play through just fine. Now, one last thing we want to do is let's zoom out by hitting Control 1. Let's go to frame 100, and I'm going to take both of these layers and copy the contents that are in them. So I'm going to go to the selection tool here. We're going to click on the airspeed indicator. We're going to shift click on the needle to make sure that both of them are selected. Once both of them are selected, we'll hit Control C to copy. And then we'll go back to scene 1. And if you remember, when we jump to frame 2, we're going to see that text again. So we need to replace this text with what we just copied. So that's why we just went through all that. So let's click on this particular movie clip. We'll double click to go into it. And again, we don't need the mask and the text under the text. So we can just right click uncheck mask there, and then right click, turn that into a guide, turn that into a guide, and turn the bottom one into a guide. Okay, so above all these guide layers, let's go ahead and lock them and make them invisible, and then we'll create a new layer, and we'll call this layer AI. So inside the AI layer, we're going to click there and then just hit Control, Shift, and V to paste in place, and there we go. We've pasted our airspeed indicator in place, and now when we go back to scene 1, there we go. And when we move across, we'll see that that actually animates out just like the text did earlier. Now, making this particular graphic bigger really pixelates it, and that's going to make your file look really bad. We don't want the file to look really bad, because if you have this really fancy Flash template website, and then right at the beginning you see something that looks this poor and this pixelated, then people are going to know right away that you built this from a template and that you're not very good at putting graphics together. So if you have something that looks like this, that's really going to stand out from the really high quality of the rest of the template. So instead of going with the animation like it is here, let's just have it fade out. And you'll notice if we go to frame 15, that's basically what's happening there. It's fading out there. So this is going to last from frame 2 to frame 15. Let's just grab all of these frames in between, right click, and I'm going to click on clear keyframe. Now make sure you don't select the first frame here when you do that, because we need this keyframe. But we're going to clear all those other keyframes, and then right click, remove tween. Okay, so we have it in frame 2 like we need it. Now we're going to go to frame 15, hit F6 to add a new keyframe. Actually, before we add that new keyframe, let's actually put these both in their own symbol, because right now they're two separate objects. Okay, no, they're not separate objects. They are inside this movie clip. Sorry about that. We'll go back, let's scroll back up a little bit. In frame 15, we can just hit F6 to add a new keyframe there, and then in that new keyframe, we'll click on our movie clip, and change color from none to alpha down in our properties panel, and bring that alpha down to 0%. And then we can right click between the two keyframes and create motion tween. So now we have it fading out, and that's going to work a lot better because we don't have the image getting larger and getting pixelated on us. It's just simply fading out, and that looks a lot better. That way it won't stand out and look really bad against the rest of our beautifully designed website. Okay, so now that that's all set up, let's test our movie and see how it works. Now remember, when we test our movie, we're going to have to simulate the download, otherwise we're not going to see any of this occur. But hopefully when we do that, we'll be able to see a really cool animation of our altimeter moving over to 100. Okay, so we'll go to View, Simulate Download, and here we go. Sure enough, we see our little needle rotating. And that's really cool. We have this really cool animation that we didn't really have to do any programming for at all, because the programming was already done. All we had to do was put an animation inside this movie clip that took up 100 frames, and the action script that was already written is updating those frames as our movie loads. And when it gets to 100%, guess what? Our movie starts playing. So that's really cool. So that's basically how you can update your preloader to make it do something more than just show a little bit of text. So I hope you've learned something from this, and I hope you find some creative ways to use this no matter what kind of website you're building. Obviously, if you're not building a website on planes, you won't want an altimeter here. You might have some other kind of, maybe a loading pie chart or something like that that takes up 100 frames. But either way, I hope you can find some creative ways to apply this to your own Flash templates and your own preloaders. And we can go ahead and move on with the next video.